Welcome to AI in Learning, a series that unites today's most forward-thinking voices in learning and artificial intelligence. Together, we'll explore not just what's changing, but what it means for how people learn, grow, and stay relevant. Each conversation goes beyond the trends and buzzwords to understand real shifts that are happening in skills, tools, and mindsets that are shaping the future of learning at work. Hey everybody, I'm Justin Seeley, e-learning evangelist for Adobe. Welcome to our series on AI in learning. Today I'm joined by Jeremy Utley, and very happy to have him here. He's a go-to expert for actionable insights on AI and creativity. He's a distinguished Stanford professor, best-selling author, taught over 1 million students, and advised Fortune 500 CEOs on harnessing AI to unlock innovation. And he's the co-author of Idea Flow, the only business metric that matters, and host of the Top 1% podcast, Beyond the Prompt, how to use AI in your company. So Jeremy, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
So really interesting stuff. So taught over 1 million students at Stanford, and I actually have listened to your podcast, by the way, big fan.
Oh yeah?
So yeah, very, very excited to have you and get to dive into some of this with you. But let's start off a little bit with AI in general. So, what's one thing that everybody right now believes in learning or AI in general that they think is right, but you think is going to be totally wrong when it's all said and done?
Oh my goodness, no pressure. I think fundamentally what I've observed with people is they look at AI like it's an answer engine rather than treating AI like a really competent teammate. And so if you look at, for example, someone's chat history, most of the time their chat history is actually a search history because they are using AI as a search tool, searching for an answer rather than as a collaborator or a teammate with whom they can create a better work product. And so I think that that's a shift. You see kind of leading AI users, they aren't really users, they're now collaborators to AI. Whereas a lot of folks, it's a glorified Google. And so as much as I can, I want to shift people from that kind of passive posture of Googling, searching, looking for answers to co-working and collaborating to achieve something greater.
How do you think that we kind of start that change management process? Like, what does that look like to start creating that mind shift?
I think for a lot of people, it involves understanding what are they trying to accomplish and where could they use either expertise or coaching or assistance. I often will say to people, imagine you get a Stanford Business School intern this summer.
Right.
The only thing you've got to do is be very clear on what's the workflow that they're going to take off of your plate. If you can get clear about what workflow a Stanford MBA intern can take off your plate this summer, you can start to work with AI differently. Most people don't think in terms of atomized workflows, and they aren't being very articulate about what is the progression of activities that they undertake to accomplish a work product. But if they can do that, then they can bring AI into the picture in a really powerful way.
Yeah, I think that's very true, and I think that's also kind of how we think about AI at Adobe in general. Like the way we're building the tools and features inside of the product that I evangelize, Adobe Learning Manager. We're thinking a lot about, what are the ways that we can take stuff off of the LMS admin's plate? What are the ways that we can make content discovery easy for the learner, removing those friction points that we often see. And like if it doesn't do that, if it doesn't serve that purpose, like we're not building that. You know what I mean? Like we're not just doing the bells and whistles of putting a bunch of generative things and like that. We're trying to be as practical as possible.
Yeah.
And I think when people understand that, it's really going to help.
It comes back to user pain or customer pain. And it's an age-old principle of innovation, which was kind of my area of expertise prior to AI entering the scene. But attending to problems matters. The kinds of people who generate solutions are the kinds of people who are attentive to problems. Since the 1960s, we've been giving students at Stanford this assignment. Keep a bug list. Write down a list of the things that bug you. Not errors in lines of code. This is long before computer programming entered common parlance, but it's this awareness of a designer, of an innovator, that if they pay attention to things that bother them, they become the kind of person who thinks of solutions. And that's true for Adobe Learning. That's true for innovators writ large. Paying attention to customer pain points is a great way to fuel ideation.
Totally agree. Absolutely. So, when we start thinking about these
shifts in mindset that we want to create, what's the biggest difference between organizations that actually get value from AI and learning, or in general, and ones that don't? Like, what's the difference between those two things?
Well, there's a few components to that. One is not just usage guidelines. I think some people, in the absence of information, are either fearful or hesitant, and they don't want to mess something up, so they do nothing. So you've kind of got people who are sitting on the sidelines waiting for permission or guidance, so they need that. There are other people who are kind of shadow AI users, which is also a problem, because then they end up using either free models, which are less intelligent, or non-secure models. And both of those things can be problematic for organizations. So usage guidelines is kind of one thing, but I think actually as problematic as not having usage guidelines is leading with usage guidelines, because compliance or legal kind of dominates that conversation.
Sure.
And I had somebody remark to me the other day, I've gotten involved with a lot of sports organizations, and I was working with one of the pro sports leagues, and one of my students in this class followed up with me and said, what's interesting is all of the league's education efforts have basically boiled down to how to not use AI. You told us how to use AI.
Right.
And if you think about a lot of usage guidelines, it's basically what not to do. And so beyond kind of what not to do, I think leaders, specifically CEOs and senior leaders, need a manifesto, a bold vision of what do we believe can be unleashed through collaboration with AI. Very few leaders have taken the time to state their bold vision. And then when you have a bold vision in place for how you can continue to delight the customer and continue to deliver the value that you're delivering in the marketplace, and even newly imagined value, then you can do things like operating model, right? How are we organized? What does education and training look like? What do incentives and measurement and performance reviews look like? All of that should be cast in the light of a bold vision. And then usage guidelines, I think, fit somewhere kind of nested underneath those things.
Right. Do you think that that's going to take a sea change at the leadership level? Like, are we going to have to wait for this new generation of folks to come into power, so to speak, or is there a way that we could do leadership development training that kind of gets them to that point where they're less scared to share that vision?
Yeah, I think it takes a visionary leader to be able to lead in this transformational era. I think many CEOs kind of know generally, existentially, AI matters, and maybe their board's bringing it up, and you see that increasingly in earnings calls, AI mentions and things like that. There are kind of two ways to think about it. One is the leaders who have conviction should be boldly sharing use cases, examples, spotlighting, highlighting, giving shout outs in every chance they can. The leaders who feel a sense of curiosity should be honestly expressing that they're on the learning journey. And then I think that there's probably some set of leaders who uh, the, either because of their time horizon or because of a risk profile, they may opt out. And to your point, there may need to be turnover there. But I think a lot of leaders are enthusiastic. They should be more vocal. And then a lot of leaders are curious. They should be more vocal. And being at the leading edge or being on the learning curve, both are fine and both are great. The question is, recognizing it is a learning curve. We do need to be vocal about it. We do need to be encouraging people, enthusiastic about it ourselves.
Right.
The folks who are resistors, I think that their organizations have bigger considerations.
Got it. I think, one of the things that I kind of heard in there, is that the CEOs and the leaders, they need to be more open that they're on the learning journey for this, but also they need to be cognizant of where their employees are on the learning journey as well. So do you have any type of simple framework or something that leaders can follow to get a better understanding of where their workforce is on the AI proficiency spectrum, I guess is the best way to put it?
Well, so there's proficiency is one thing, and then there's another thing which I call the F scale, which is on one end you've got fearful, and then you've got familiar, you've got fluent,
Okay.
and then you've got fun.
Love that.
So from fear, I want to shift people from fear to fun, through familiar and fluent to fun. My one simple measure is, are people giggling? Are folks laughing at what they're able to do that they were never able to do before with a sense of incredulous wonder, right? There I can see there's a high degree of proficiency there. Then to your point, there are kind of degrees of, call it not just quantity of use, but also quality of use.
Sure.
And there are different ways of evaluating that. Simple way to evaluate it is just conversational turns. So going back to our comments earlier about the difference between a chat history and a search history. What's the difference between a search and a chat? A search is one-dimensional and usually single turn. How tall is Victor Wembanyama? Answer. Conversation's over. How would I arrange my living room if I were hosting Victor Wembanyama for dinner?
Totally different story.
Conversation,
Yeah.
right? There's a back and forth. So conversational turns is kind of one way, is a very rough proxy for quality. But then there are questions like, are users defining the AI's role? Are users giving the AI sufficient context? Are users giving the AI permission to ask them questions? There's all sorts of kind of, call it prompt engineering or context engineering tactics that folks can employ to keep moving up the proficiency curve.
Got it. So we talked a little bit earlier in the introduction about your book, Idea Flow. I want to dive into that a little bit and talk about like what's one exercise or design principle from Idea Flow that every L&D leader, user should steal tomorrow to be able to generate fresher ideas for their learning projects or their learning programs.
One of the most powerful individual practices that an individual contributor or a leader can engage is the idea quota. And the basic idea of the idea quota is, instead of trying to come up with one answer or solution or angle or whatever the output is, come up with 10. Force yourself to come up with 10. And that simple reframe from what's the one right answer, which is highly qualitative, quality focused, quality aware, to what are 10 potential answers, which is highly quantity aware, oftentimes creates permission and opens people's minds.
Sure.
There are different ways of doing it. Astro Teller, who's the CEO of Google X, for example, will often say to his team, give me 5. And he doesn't mean give me a high 5. He means whenever they bring him one idea, he says, give me 5. And so teams at Google X have learned they don't just bring one idea to Astro, they bring 5. And I asked Astro once, what's the impact of that? He said, well, often what happens is a team will bring kind of their pet idea and then they sandbag with 4 dummy ideas because they know that I'm going to ask for 5. But he said, what they don't realize is half the time, one of their dummy ideas is better than their pet favorite.
Okay, that's interesting. And that kind of reminds me of something you were speaking about in your keynote this morning about the bell curve from, dopey to delightful.
Yeah,
That
exactly.
kind of thing.
Exactly.
So is that kind of the same?
Dopey is the price of delight.
Yeah.
And I really, another simple technique that folks can employ is a bad idea brainstorm.
Yes.
So at the start, if you're ever seeking to generate ideas, start with 5 minutes worst ideas possible. Instead of delighting the customer, what would anger the customer? Instead of increasing retention, what would get people to cancel their subscriptions?
Right.
But a lot of times, if you make it fun and playful, one, not only does that create psychological safety, but 2, it relieves the kind of cognitive associative barriers that keep our thinking rigid. Steve Jobs described a lot of our thinking like a record. There's these rigid grooves that our thoughts get trapped in. And something like a bad idea brainstorm or gimme 5 or whatever it might be just shakes our thinking enough out of its grooves that we increase our likelihood of serendipity and an unexpected connection and a great idea.
Yeah. I think it's one of the things that I learned early on in my career when I was leading teams is that I had to give people room to feel like it was okay to say the dopey ideas, right? I kind of grew up in that, give me the one idea, give me the best that you got kind of thing. And I realized through, just pure trial and error that was the best way to get the best performance out of my team was to let them kind of be crazy. So we would have, we called them like garbage sessions.
Yeah.
Where we would just go to a whiteboard and just, whatever you got, just get it out. And it doesn't have to be real. It doesn't have to be good. It doesn't have to be bad. Just get it out. And 9 times out of 10, we walked out of that room with something tangible, something good that we could take forward, in our program. So it really resonated with me what you were talking about today. So I appreciated that.
Yeah. I have one more tactic
Yeah.
that maybe might be useful.
Sure.
It's very simple. It's make the decision to not decide. So one of the things that a team naturally feels kind of a gravity or a tendency towards is you get to the end of the brainstorm, you want to select, you want to choose,
Right.
because we don't like ambiguity. Closure is a very real, deep psychological need. It's one of the most psychologically distressing feelings we feel as humans, for something to be unresolved. However, if something remains unresolved, it stays in our working memory. It's called the Zeigarnik effect. So as a leader, one of the most important things you can do is say, team, let's actually not choose yet. We're going to wait till the next meeting to make decisions. And what that does is it allows folks' working memory to remain active. Maybe one additional statement you can make as a leader, you can even just play this moment if you want for your team. I believe that our best ideas haven't occurred to us yet. All of the work that we've been doing on the whiteboard here is just priming us to individually think of better stuff between now and the next meeting. So in our next meeting, we're going to look at not only all these ideas, but even more ideas that are going to occur to you between now and then we'll evaluate those.
Love that approach. I think that's really cool. So I think that's a really good takeaway for anybody, really. Doesn't matter. Doesn't have to be L&D. Anybody. That's a pretty universal, I think, takeaway for leadership. Um, I also heard you talk about cognitive quicksand as a point where progress feels, slowed by friction. So what are the red flags that learners or even entire organizations can look for to realize that they're in cognitive quicksand?
The most telling symptom of cognitive quicksand is the decision to have another meeting. So anytime you resolve that we need to have another meeting, you know you may be in danger. Because if there's no new information, there will not be a new conversation. And so the decision to have another meeting is a procrastination tactic. And what I often say is make sure you are deploying experiments between this meeting and the next meeting, because experiments are what create new information.
Oh, yeah.
So if you go, wow, we're really not sure which one, then the question is, okay, between now and the next meeting, what are we going to do that's going to give us new information to make that decision?
Makes sense. And kind of piggybacking off of that with experiments and things like that, like what is your advice to L&D leaders who feel torn between moving fast with AI experimentation and also making sure that, they're ensuring trust, accuracy, and also everybody's favorite word, compliance. Like how do we balance that scale between moving fast and breaking stuff, which is I think, a lot of people's mindset when it comes to these like new ideas, and then also making sure that we're creating environments that are accurate, trustful, that kind of thing.
Well, it's basically, it's a training challenge. It's an education challenge. This is L&D's wheelhouse. Yeah. People should be moving fast and they should be equipped to move fast. So to me, those things aren't in tension. They're certainly not at odds. People need to be trained in order to be unleashed. Your goal is to unleash people. And so you do want them moving fast. However, in order to move fast, they need to understand what they're dealing with. It's like fire or electricity. They're incredibly powerful, but they have to be controlled and contained. There's a reason that we have all sorts of regulations on every plug. It's because they're so powerful. And so having a sense for what are the protections, making sure that everyone's clear on what those are so that they can run the blender and the hairdryer and the dishwasher and all the amazing things that electricity enables. It's not that you want to only be running electric toothbrushes. No, you want to power huge things. Make sure that the safety is there. So enabling and educating users on what are the considerations that they should bear in mind when working with these powerful systems is not meant to slow them down. It's meant to enable them to move quickly.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. And I think that it's very similar to how we think about it when we're talking about like our product, Adobe Learning Manager. the tools that we've introduced, for example, we have the AI admin assistant on the back end to help new admins get up to speed as fast as possible. Also to help them understand how to run specific reports. Basically, how do we take a lot of that lift off your plate? How do we remove friction for you to enable you to move faster, to do more things, and do it in a way that feels very trustworthy. So, as an example, our AI admin assistant is only trained on our help data. So you're very much aware of the fact that what you're asking questions about, you're returning answers that are only like from us, right? So we've created that system of trust and things like that. And I think that's something that we can take as a guideline moving forward, is to try to figure out ways to, yes, let people move fast, let people do things, let them have these tools, but also find a way to make sure that they feel comfortable using those tools. Because I think there's still a fear component when it comes to AI.
Yeah.
For sure. Do you think that people are still kind of on that edge of,
Many people are. Yeah, there's an existential fear. There's a kind of classic technology uncertainty, which is attached to every technological change. But then you've got this kind of the hype cycle and the doom cycle. Right now, both the hype and doom are up to 11. And so what I'm trying to do in all of my engagements is just be practical. Here's how you can practically get unleashed. Here's how you can practically experience meaningful uplift, augmentation as an individual. And it's not about hype or about fear. It's just about being practical.
Sure. Yeah, I think that practicality is one of the ways that we teach a lot of things, right? It's the best way to teach a lot of things, is to show people. That was always for me how I learned best, was don't tell me how this thing works. Tell me why I need to know how it works. Tell me how it's going to make my life better. Tell me why I need to know how to balance my checkbook. Things like that.
Well, I joke, I flew here from San Francisco.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about aerodynamics. That doesn't prevent me from getting on an airplane. I don't understand my digestive tract. I still ate breakfast this morning. I think a lot of AI enablement and empowerment is trying to explain token prediction or the attention mechanism of a transformer model, rather than, get on the plane, eat breakfast. The important thing is not that you understand the underlying technology. The important thing is that you feel comfortable and confident employing it for practical benefit. It was so much faster for me to get to Las Vegas by taking the airplane. I don't need to know the next thing about aerodynamics.
That's fair. That's fair. So when we think about that, then, and start to think about how people learn and modern learning platforms as they're being built today with AI in mind,
Sorry, can I say one
Yeah.
other thing?
Sure.
On your previous question.
Yeah.
I was trying to think of it and I just thought of it. Is that okay?
Yeah, go back.
One of the things that I think is really unexpected from my understanding of learning science, there's two things I want to mention. One is active learning versus passive learning, right? And the reality that using what you learn is the key to knowledge retention. Most learning evaporates because it's passive. Most passive learning isn't actually learning at all. I learned that from Stephen Kosslyn, who was a podcast guest. You might have heard that episode.
Absolutely.
So that one's great. The other thing that I learned from Laszlo Bock, who was the head of people ops at Google before he started Humu, he and I taught a class together at Stanford years ago, and he told me that from all of their measurement of people operations at Google, the variable that was most influential on whether a learner could implement the tools that they learned in a class was whether their team expected them to change. So if their team did not expect for the learning environment or experience to affect the behavior, then they perceived any change in behavior as a blip on the radar, and they expected behavior to revert to the pre-education mean, and it did. If the team expected the learner's behavior to change, they attributed a change of behavior to a new way of working, and they expected the behavior to persist, and it did. And so to me, it speaks to what Danny Kahneman has called restraining forces, or environmental factors. Our behavior is a function of environment. And an educational experience is what's called a driving force that enables. But there are also the kind of countervailing forces are called restraining forces. And what Kahneman has observed is the best way to achieve an equilibrium change is to remove a restraining force. So oftentimes you actually don't need to add more education. You need to ask, why aren't they behaving this way already? And oftentimes it's the system, it's the context, it's the team's expectations, to use the Google example. And so if you shift the team's expectations, the default becomes the behavior should persist. So going back to your question about how L&D leaders should approach equipping, it's not just about equipping the individual with abilities. It's about changing the expectations of the system within which that individual operates in order to increase the likelihood that a new behavior will persist.
So when we start to think about these systems and things that learners are involved with, I think one of the things that modern learning platforms are trying to do is to, like you said, make it more personal, make it more contextualized to what they want to do. What products do they want to learn? What roles do they want to obtain? What skills do they need to know in order to move up the career ladder? I think that's been a struggle for us in corporate learning is telling them how to go from point A to point B, giving them that clear roadmap when it comes to recommendations and things like that. So I'm just, curious with that personalization and also, interactions with AI in general. Like, do you see a future where, there's a sidekick next to you while you're not just in a classroom, but maybe like in an online learning system where, you can talk to this thing, it can tell you, help you assess your skill gaps and things like that. Like, is that something that
I mean, undoubtedly. I think the thing that's difficult for humans is we have very limited short-term memory, right? So take any one of the courses on your platform or any other platform. The instructor can hardly remember everything they've done. Okay, just in that one class. And then you ask the instructor, what's the next class they should take, that a learner should take? Unless it's within their kind of wheelhouse, they have no idea. And what's a prerequisite for this class? Well, they probably have no idea, right? And so just in terms of human limitations, that's something that humans can't really provide believably. However, an AI is fully capable of holding that context and content in its short-term memory, as it were, and can make recommendations that are deeply knowledgeable and meaningful. That's on the platform side, right? Certainly and then if as a learner you have a learning expert who's accompanying you throughout your life, let alone on a particular platform, but in helping you understand and navigate what's the next best skill to acquire, I think it's a uniquely it's an opportunity that's uniquely well suited to AI.
Got it.
To be that trusted resource for lifelong learning, really.
Right. So a lot of what we're talking about in the context of like what exists today. I want to look a little bit into a crystal ball for a second, and like in 3 to 5 years, and even that's probably maybe even too short of a runway. But let's just say 3 to 5 years. What does an AI empowered learning environment look like? What does our workforce look like? What is your vision for what does all this look like in 3 to 5 years? Because we're moving at such a rapid pace. I can't even imagine how far we'll be in 3 to 5 years.
Yeah. I It's really hard to imagine. I think that the human doing the work or the human with the objective to learn is going to have much more wisdom and discernment around what the next best learning experiences are, the next best work projects to develop are, right? And then I think that increasingly the AI will be able to perform. For example, if you need a product strategy, it's one thing for you as a human to learn how to craft a product strategy. It's another thing to have a great product strategy. The instructor is going to increasingly become collaborator and co-author, and will be with you as the student to co-develop and co-deliver based on its knowledge of the subject matter, i.e. product strategy, and your unique knowledge of the content, i.e. the product that needs a strategy. And the work product will be indistinguishable from the learning experience, because the learning experience and the work product will be one and the same.
Interesting. So it sounds like, because you hear a lot of people, um, making these big decrees that, AI will or will not replace, it sounds like you are more on the side of humans plus AI, not humans or AI.
Yeah.
Is that fair to say that's what you see us being more as a collaborator with these things?
Absolutely.
It's a
100%.
teammate in the room,
That's right.
essentially.
That's right. Absolutely. I'm a big believer in the human plus AI collaboration. Right now, even agentic systems do not take initiative. The human, as I say, must be the prompt. So an agentic system can do whatever you ask, provided you ask. Right? There is a human role for taking initiative. You go, but what if you don't know what to do and you want to ask AI? Great. You still prompted for, please give me options about what to do. And I think that's a deeply human skill. If I think about young folks in my life who I advise, I'm teaching them how to be initiative takers, how to look for problems to solve, how to imagine what's on their boss's mind, how to over deliver, double deliver, triple deliver, because that initiative taking instinct is a deeply human advantage that will get amplified in the age of AI.
Very cool. Well, I think that pretty much wraps up my questions. I want to thank you again for taking the time
My
to
pleasure.
be here. I really appreciate it. And, really hope everybody enjoys our video series on AI and e-learning. Again, I'm Justin Seeley. He's Jeremy Utley. Jeremy, is there anything, where can people find you, more about your work and things like that if they want to take a look?
LinkedIn, great place to start. And then book ideaflow.design. You can find the book there.
Oh, very cool. All right. Thanks very much for joining me. I really appreciate it. All right.